Let's face it, folks, net zero is essentially a cult. It has all the characteristics of a cult. We can go through them. Absolute authoritarianism. There's no questioning of the net zero creed. And if you do, it's punishable by expulsion. You've got charismatic leaders like Al Gore and Ed Miliband? Okay, maybe it's not a cult after all. Promise of a new life. If you join the net zero cult, you'll feel so much better in yourself. You'll be virtuous and saving the planet. You have to be unquestioningly loyal to the message. No dissent allowed. You must never say anything against the creed of net zero. Members of the cult think they're being persecuted by the outside world, which means that they have to react irrationally and angrily to any criticism of the net zero creed. It has all the characteristics of a cult. And what's really interesting is that when somebody finally leaves the cult, it's like a breath of fresh air and suddenly they start speaking sense again. There's absolutely no logic to having a net zero policy in the UK. The UK has less than 2% of global emissions. So if you reduce the UK's emissions to zero, literally zero, overnight, the climate wouldn't even bat an eyelid. It's like here in Australia. Less than 2% of emissions. We could stop every single source of emissions overnight and the climate would not notice. But that doesn't matter because we still have to keep repeating the mantras of net zero. Like renewable energy is cheaper, it's more efficient, it's more reliable. Even when we know full well that these things are absolutely false. You cannot really imagine that someone like Ed Miliband or Chris Bowen actually believes the stuff that they're spouting all the time. It's like they have been reprogrammed in their heads to suspend critical thought so that they can just keep repeating the cult's mantras. But at the end of the day, when you've finished your career in politics, you can look back and maybe regain some of those critical thinking skills that you abandoned 30 years ago when you joined the cult. And that's exactly what's happened with one Tony Blair, who used to be the Prime Minister of the UK between 1997 and 2007, and who would have put in place, or at least set the wheels in motion, for some of these crazy climate and net zero policies. But now, with the benefit of hindsight and being distanced from his role as a politician, suddenly he's able to escape from the cult and have a revelation, which The Guardian reports, probably through gritted teeth. Climate plan based on phasing out fossil fuels doomed to fail, says Tony Blair. Of course it's doomed to fail because it's impossible. It's based on fantasy. It is the workings of a cult. Former PM claims net zero policies losing public support and says there should be greater focus on carbon capture. Well, that second part is still a bit cult-like, but let's give him the benefit of the doubt for now. Tony Blair has called for the government to change course on climate, suggesting a strategy that limits fossil fuels in the short term or encourages people to limit consumption is doomed to fail. Yes, it is. In comments that have prompted a backlash within Labour, well, it would do because they're still in the cult, the former Prime Minister suggested the UK government should focus less on renewables and more on technological solutions such as carbon capture. Blair said people were being asked to make financial sacrifices and changes in lifestyle when they know that their impact on global emissions is minimal. He said any strategy based on either phasing out fossil fuels in the short term or limiting consumption is a strategy doomed to fail. Isn't it amazing when you escape from the tentacles of the cult, how you suddenly start to think clearly again? Writing the foreword for a report from the Tony Blair Institute, TBI, he said the current climate debate was riven with irrationality and suggested net zero was losing public support. It's not just losing, it has lost public support because it is based in pure fantasy. His comments echo similar criticism of net zero by the Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch. The paper itself, written by the TBI's Lindy Fersman, said net zero policies were now increasingly viewed as unaffordable, ineffective or politically toxic. In the UK, however, climate change policies have retained popularity. The think tank Persuasion UK said in a report published on Monday that Labour could lose far more seats at the next election from disillusioned left-wing voters defecting to the Greens. Greens than from defections to Reform, which is a right-wing party. The most recent YouGov poll on the subject found 66% of UK voters were worried about climate change. Last week, Keir Starmer said the government was going all out for a low-carbon future, telling a conference in London that tackling the climate crisis and bolstering energy security were in the DNA of my government, and that we won't wait, we will accelerate. And of course, now we get to see the responses of those still shackled in the cult, which are as unhinged as you'd expect. One Labour MP said it was an unhelpful intervention that could be interpreted as a direct critique of Starmer and his Energy Secretary, Mad Ed Miliband. We know that businesses see renewables as a key path to economic growth, and it's not like government aren't already doing things like carbon capture. I don't get the point of pushing something like this, and the unpopularity of net zero is just plain wrong, they said. Well, it is in the bubble that you live in when you are enmeshed in a cult. You live in a bubble. The information is filtered so you only hear the cult's message, not the reality from outside. Campaigners and industry figures said that there were flaws in the TBI argument. Holly Brazier-Tope, the Deputy Director of Politics at Green Alliance, they are firmly in the cult and in the bubble, said this report is disappointing given Tony Blair's strong track record on climate action, seeming to throw in the towel on avoiding the worst climate impacts and promoting defeatism instead of real solutions. It also wildly exaggerates the public backlash, especially in the UK, where support for climate action remains solid. Yes, it does within the bubble of the cult, but not in the real world, Holly Brazier-Tope. Adam Berman, the Director of Policy and Advocacy at Energy UK, said net zero is the economic opportunity of the 21st century. Through the rapid uptake in technologies like wind and solar, just look at Spain for how well that's going, UK emissions have halved since 1990. It's not a question of either or. The UK will need both conventional clean technologies that are operating at scale today, in addition to investments in newer technologies. Can you see what I'm saying? Everything that these people are saying is from within this bubble, the cone of silence within the net zero cult that doesn't allow you to look outside and see what's happening. You can only repeat the mantras of the cult. So it's incredibly refreshing to see someone like Tony Blair come out and actually say what the rest of us, like people like me, have been saying for months and months and years and years. The Guardian, obviously because it's a madly climate alarmist publication, will be spitting chips, obviously, because they call it the climate crisis whenever they mention it, because they think it genuinely is a crisis, because if you live in the bubble, it's a crisis. But when somebody finally escapes from the cult and starts speaking sense, they cannot bear it. But to the rest of us, it's a breath of fresh air.